Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining February's TAM customer webinar. Before we get into today's content, I'd like to point out a couple of things. Our next TAM customer webinar will be on March the 12th with guest speaker Paul McSherry, one of our vSAN customer success architects. And in this upcoming session, we'll discuss VMware Hyperconverged infrastructure solutions, operational factors, theory, potential gotchas, and approaches to help prepare for production HCI. If you have any questions during today's webinar, please use the Q&A feature of Zoom and we'll address them during the webinar. Also, this webinar will be recorded and your TAM can make the recording link available to you after today's session. So with the release of vRealize Operations 8, we introduced several new features to help you manage your multi-cloud environments, hosting both traditional and modern applications. And in today's session, John Diaz will dive into the tenets of vRealize Operations and explore the self-driving operations of the Troubleshooting Workbench, all powered by advanced artificial intelligence and machine learning. John is a senior staff technical marketing architect specializing in cloud management solutions, a veteran IT professional, and an author on the VMware Cloud Management blog. We are very, very happy to have him present on this topic today. So with that said, we'll get going. John, I'll pass it over to you to get us started.
All right, thanks, Chris. Appreciate the intro and welcome everyone. I'm happy to be here with our TAM customers and delighted to share with you what's going on with vRealize Operations. 8.0 is our current release. If you haven't looked at it or didn't hear about the launch, you're going to learn about it today. So we'll cover that. And then I'll follow up also with some pretty cool demos to show some of the troubleshooting capabilities, as Chris was talking about, that you can leverage in your own environment. These have been really popular with our customers, been very well received. Customers have actually started to use them and been successful in using these new capabilities. So I'm pretty confident you're going to like what you see. Please do feel free to ask questions throughout. Chris and Andy will interrupt me if there's a question that they can't answer or one that feels like needs a little extra attention or clarification. So, well, let's dive in. So, self-driving operations powered by AI ML. That's a big, broad statement, right? We're making a pretty powerful claim there. But what are we really talking about? So, if you look at vRealize Operations, if you're familiar with vRealize Operations, it's always had this aspect of AI in the product. We've had things like dynamic thresholds. We've had predictions on when capacity will start to run out, or when you may run out of capacity or need to add more capacity, or VMs that are oversized, undersized. We're just bringing that more to the forefront now, and we're kind of utilizing it in new and different exciting ways. So when you talk about the things that we have been doing with continuous performance optimization, with the workload placement that we introduced back in the early 7.x days and continue to build on, as well as the capacity management engine rework that we did around the same time, actually in the 6.6 version, 6.7, and then 7.0 versions. And then, now we're bringing that to the intelligent remediation side. Like how, we thought about how can we add the components of this machine learning that we have in vRealize Operations and bring that more to the forefront for intelligent remediation. And then, of course, the fourth pillar is configuration and compliance. And I'll touch on a little bit about what we added there or what's new there. But that kind of approach is what we're taking for all four major feature areas with vRealize Operations. Now, vRealize Operations is a cloud, part of our cloud management platform. Okay, so when you look at your deployments, no matter where you are in what I'll call the cloud journey, if you're running a private cloud today and not necessarily looking at extending out into either VMware Cloud on AWS or using one of our VMware Cloud provider partners to run or extend your SDDC to those public cloud offerings, or if you're looking at whether or not you're considering native cloud from AWS, Azure, Google, etc., we have you covered. The idea is that we want to be that management platform for that stack. So that platform should be able to give you visibility and apply that same rich AI ML capability across the entire stack. So that is our goal, kind of our marching orders as far as what we're doing with the platform. And then, of course, those 4 key capability areas that I talked about: performance and capacity and configuration and intelligent remediation, troubleshooting, those factor in as well. And then as we continue to build this out, you can see that, we want this to be a policy-driven capability that is, I won't say set and forget, but we don't want anybody to think that, hey, we're going to turn a robot loose on your environment and just let it make decisions in a vacuum about, how your environment should be run. You are in full control of vRealize operations through intents and policies that allow you to control how things are handled, whether they're handled automatically or not, if there are business SLAs or considerations that need to be taken into consideration, and so forth. Okay, and then the idea, of course, is to give you better performance, reduce downtime, reduce cost, improve efficiency, and so forth. So those outcomes are the result of all the capability that you see below on that AI-driven platform. Okay, so the use cases that we focus on with vRealize operations, and the ones that I'll focus on most today the one that I'll focus most on today is the one right there in the middle, app-aware operations. That was a key talking point for us with the 8.0 release, a little bit in some of the earlier releases of 7.x leading up to that, but really became at the forefront for us in the 8.0 release. And I'll tell you what we mean by that, but just to give you, kind of a preview, we're not talking about becoming an application monitoring platform in vRealize operations, or replacing or trying to replace some of those capabilities that you have or tools that your app teams may use. But it's about giving you and IT operations, the VI administrator, visibility into what's running in your environment, because at the end of the day, that's what you're accountable for, those business critical applications, where they're running, and how changes in the underlying infrastructure could potentially impact those in either positive or negative ways. And we'll drill into that a little bit more. But there are other use cases, of course, HCI, hybrid cloud, or multi-cloud, as we're going to be calling it here going forward. And then, of course, the compliance piece as well. Now, what our roadmap, kind of forward looking a little bit, not giving you a whole lot of detail here, but we did release 8.0 at VMworld. We actually announced it at VMworld, and then we released it a few weeks later. And then at the same time, we announced that we're launching a cloud version. Okay, so what we wanted to do is give our customers choice of whether to deploy on premises in their own data centers, as they traditionally have done, or if you don't want to take on the responsibility of deploying, upgrading, managing, backing up that vRealize operations infrastructure cluster, we can do that for you. And you can just reap the benefits of the value that vRealize operations has. So that's why we're bringing SaaS. It's the same product, whether you choose to run it on premises yourself or use it as a SaaS offering from VMware. But so you don't have to relearn anything. You don't have to figure out, it's like, okay, now I'm using the cloud version. What's different? It works exactly the same way. We actually just starting beta this week. We've onboarded some customers there, so you see that time frame. We're definitely on time for that, and then we'll have initial availability of that later this quarter when we launch the next version of vRealize Operations 8, and those will come out together. So a little bit of a roadmap and where we're headed here. Okay, so let's dig into what's new in vRealize Operations 8.0, and I'm going to try to sprinkle this with some demos or relevant content instead of just drowning you in slideware here. But let's start with this first pillar of performance optimization, and a couple of things that we did here. Our integration story is very important, right? So we sell vRealize Suite, which contains many of the vRealize products, and the customer's expectation, rightfully so, is that these products plug in and work together. And so we're driving tighter and tighter integration with our partner product from the same family, vRealize Automation 8.0, which was kind of underwent a massive change from the 7.x version in terms of code, but they are now at parity with what the cloud version is. So again, whether you're running VRA in cloud or on premises, you're going to be using the same bits essentially. But it was a great opportunity for us to really drive our integrative capability in vRealize Operations 8.x with that new code base, so that we can get to the level of interoperability and parity that our customers expect. We also did some more work around the workload optimization, where for those customers that are using VMware Cloud on AWS, they now have the capability to use workload optimization for those workloads that are housed in VMware Cloud on AWS. So extending out to hybrid cloud, using that service is now possible to take advantage of the workload optimization there. Also, along the lines, I forgot to mention with the VRA 8.x, we're actually getting to parity with some of the terms that they use. So one of the things that was confusing to customers is like, well, in product, in vRealize Operations, you call you call a data center one thing, but in VRA they call it a different thing. One of the biggest examples is the cloud accounts that you'll see in 8.0. We brought that nomenclature of a cloud account into vRealize Operations so that we're all speaking the same, using the same terms to identify the components that make up the suite, as well as the things that we manage with the suite. So just another integrated thing, more of a higher level architecture thing, but I think very important. So let's dig in a little bit to workload optimization. If you're not familiar with it, I mentioned earlier that there are two kind of policies at play. There's operational intent, or I mentioned intents. I don't think I broke them down by operational or business, but there are two intents that you can use to govern your the workload optimization engine in vRealize Operations. And the first of those is operational intent. And that's basically, how do I want to manage the resources that are in my virtual data center, my SDDC? Do I want to consolidate things? Do I want to balance? Do I want to, between clusters, have an even amount of resource utilization, kind of peanut butter spread the resource utilization across all of those? Or do I want to, say, cram as many VMs into as few hosts as possible? So that's your operational intent. And then the business intent is, I have an SLA that I have to meet for this gold tier, for example, of these VMs. So I want to make sure that if I move anything around, or if I need to move anything around, that those VMs get priority. Maybe I'm trying to address a compliance issue, like I have PCI environments and non-PCI certified environments, and I want to make sure that my VMs that need to be in PCI environments stay in PCI environments and don't move out, and they're initially placed in those environments. Same thing with licensing enforcement as well. So those are business intents. They're not really operational in nature, but they kind of overlay the operational intent. So we put those two together, and then workload optimization figures out the correct placement. So maybe I see that you're having a performance issue in a cluster because of resource contention, and I want to address that, but then vRealize workload optimization rather will ensure that in addressing that resource shortcoming, it is not violating any of your business rules to do that. Okay, talked about the VROps integration. Here's a little bit more detail on using the common language across the cloud management platform, shared constructs, cloud account, cloud zones, projects, users, blueprints. We're calling that the same thing in both products, right? So everybody's working, if we're using the shared native constructs from vRealize automation, they'll have the same meaning and views, et cetera, in vRealize operations as they do in vRealize automation. And then also from the vRealize operations side, that we've taken on the responsibility of costing and cost visibility for the suite. And as such, we're going to we do provide that cost visibility from vRealize operations to deployments, blueprints, requests for deployments and things like that from vRealize operations to VRA, I should say. Okay, so there's kind of bi-directional improved integration here, but the idea is that this should all be seamless to you or to your users rather. They don't really know where all this maybe cost is coming from. They don't need to be concerned about that. It's just part of the capability of the suite. All right, capacity optimization. We did a lot of updated work here or improved things here, particularly around some of our what if scenarios, doing our costing comparisons. We added public cloud costing integration with our CloudHealth offering. So that's another integration a little bit outside of the suite, but it is an important integration for us, for those customers who have a lot of public cloud that they're already running and they want to kind of bring that all in under one dashboard. We're doing that with that particular integration as well. So let's dig into some of these. The what if analysis, if you're not familiar, this allows you to do some planning, proactive planning for your private cloud, your hyperconverged infrastructure, if you're running that, and then also public cloud migration what if analysis, migration planning, for example, is possible there. So we continue to enhance this with every release. So you'll see more and more of these cards pop up, and the existing ones will get more and more capability. For example, we've added the ability to not only model adding HCI nodes, but also removing HCI nodes as well. And we've enhanced the data center or the private cloud comparisons, where you can compare your data centers to see what would be the effect of moving an application from one of your private cloud data centers to another data center. And then our workload planning is extended from not just on the traditional, but also in hyperconverged, where you can add and remove VMs in a hyperconverged what if planning scenario, which obviously includes storage capacity and utilization as well. So an important part of the hyperconverged stack. Before I dig in, I see there's a few questions popping up. Let me see, Chris, Andy,
Yeah.
are there anything I would need to tackle here?
There are two questions around licensing and for the vRealize Operations Cloud version. You know, I think we can't really cover costs, but we have any insight into the licensing model? And if not, we could take it offline. I don't know if you have any information.
Yeah, that's unfortunately I can't. We're close to nailing that down. There are, as you can imagine, legal approvals and business approvals that have to happen. So I can't really speak to it right now, but we will have some announcements on that in the coming weeks. So watch for our launch, any launch announcements that we have within the next month or so. I would say you'll be able to get that information.
Gotcha. Okay, that's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss something. And then, you know, there was a question about the cloud version in terms of vendor. Or I should say, cloud provider, AWS, Azure, Google, IBM. You know, our mantra is any. But I figured I would ask to see if you had any insight on that when it comes to VROps.
So is it the question regarding which cloud is the VROps cloud going to be hosted on? Is that the question, or which clouds do we support for vRealize operations monitoring of cloud?
I think it's more around support, probably not necessarily where it resides.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, basically any cloud. And in the product, we do have, and I can actually show this. Make a note to do that. I can actually show the different cloud comparisons that we can do, and you can actually add additional clouds in. If we don't have a cloud provider that you intend to use or are using, then there's actually a process for you to provide the data as far as like the costing and the instance sizes and things like that, and then you can add that cloud to the comparison as well. So yep, okay. any cloud is our mantra. Yes.
Yep, gotcha. Okay. So we have a couple more here, but if you need to move forward, we can. It's around dashboarding capabilities for vRealize workflow utilization. I don't know if that's coming up. So their ask was, any reporting dashboard capabilities for vRealize workflow utilization?
Yeah, I'm not, Tony, I see that question. If you could give a little more detail on what you're looking for, I'm not quite sure what you're getting at there, but
yeah, gotcha. Okay. So yeah, Tony, if you could just do another one to explain, we'll be happy to answer. And then this is kind of an interesting one. I'd kind of like to know the differences between VRB and VROps and the chargeback reporting. You know, we've seen some integrations in vRealize operations. Do you have any insight into that?
Yeah, so we are working towards that. We do have, there are some dashboards that peer of mine on the team, Brandon Gordon, has actually developed to fulfill that request in part. And if you go out to vRealize.vmware.com and go to the sample exchange, you can find dashboards there relative to costing that can probably help you fill any of the gaps that you might have between vRealize business and the VROps costing. So I would check that out. Okay. All right. So let me move on. We'll let these questions kind of queue up a little bit, and you know, some of them may be answered as we go through the rest of the presentation here.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All right. Yeah, so what if scenarios, just a few details here. We've got data center comparison, so I can look at the cost of running VMs between the various data centers within my environment. And so I can do some analysis on where it's cheaper to run workloads within my own SDDC, my private cloud. And this really gets into that aspect of, you know, running your private cloud like a public cloud, so that you understand the cost, you understand the cost of running VMs at the data center level, And if you think about it, it's no different than when you go to, say, Amazon, and you're like, well, if I go to this region, or I go to Azure, and I'm comparing West Coast to Central US to East Coast, and you'll see that the prices are different. There's a lot of factors that go into that, and the same applies for your data center as well. That you may have a higher or lower cost depending on equipment, cost at the site, labor costs, age of the infrastructure, and so forth. So good stuff to have. We improved the cost drivers, so we've added cost drivers for storage, license, maintenance, labor, network facilities that you can do per data center. So that kind of helps with that differentiating the cost between data centers in your environment. We've got a new network cost driver based on various speed NICs that you can fill out there, and then we've added depreciation metrics for hosts as well. When we look at our new capability to show back the VMware Cloud on AWS cost, there's a management pack that you can install to get this. And as you move or migrate into VMware Cloud on AWS, obviously we can give you a cost estimate on what that may look like in the what if scenario when you're planning. But from an ongoing basis, you'll want to keep an eye on that as well. And that's what this capability gives you, or this management pack gives you, the ability to kind of unify the visibility of your private cloud and your hybrid cloud on VMware Cloud on AWS into a single view. And of course, public cloud costing is just as important, and that's done through the CloudHealth management pack, where CloudHealth really already has a strong offering there. Instead of us kind of inventing our own, the reason that we acquire new companies and new technologies is because somebody's really already done a great job of that. And customers are already using CloudHealth to manage and understand their public cloud costing. So why not just share that information with vRealize operations to, again, give you a combined, consolidated view. No matter where your workloads are, you understand your costing, be it private cloud, hybrid, or public. All right, let's move into troubleshooting, and this is kind of the centerpiece. This is actually the area that I own from a product standpoint. We'll talk about the Troubleshooting Workbench. I'll do a demo here to show you what, kind of bring that together and show you how that all works. We extended our capability with the number of, not only a number of applications that we monitor, but some additional capability for the Telegraph agent, such as the custom script execution, which brings it to parity if you're familiar with endpoint operations. What this is it gives you the ability to actually create your own metrics by running a script in the guest OS and returning a value, which will be stored as a metric data for that virtual machine. And I have a demo. If we have time, I can show you how that works. Service Discovery, which was a management pack that you could install optionally, is now built into the product natively. It's still optional. You have to toggle it on to actually use it, but we made it a lot easier to use it, and that also opens up some new interesting capabilities that I will also demonstrate with top in process and one-time script execution, which really give you powerful troubleshooting capabilities, and you'll see that in that flow that we do here in a minute. We made some enhancements to our management packs for SDDC, PKS, NSXT, Skyline, etc. And then we also added a new management pack for Azure as well, joining our AWS management pack. So rather than kind of drill into this, let me flip over to demo mode, because I think the demo would be a better place to start, and it gives you really a better understanding of what the Troubleshooting Workbench can do, and then we'll see if we have any questions based on that. But from a troubleshooting standpoint, I talked about AppAware IT operations, and this is really demonstrated here on this dashboard where I've got a little shopping cart application. This is, COTS software. It could be open source software, but it's a solution that this customer may be using in this example to run a retail storefront on the web. And what I've done is I've created a custom dashboard for this application. And you see it's a two-tier application. I've got information about the health of the application, any alerts. I've got user experience measurements down here that I'm doing through an HTTP check that's run through the Telegraph agent. And I'm even looking at the properties of the various components, the health over time, et cetera. And the first thing that I notice is, and the other thing I would point out is with this, I see the relationship between the application tiers and the underlying infrastructure. Right now, I'm just looking at the VMs, but I could extend that out and see like which hosts they're running on, which data stores, which clusters, et cetera. So I can really drill down and get more information about the underlying infrastructure that supports this application. So that's in essence when we say app-aware operations, that's what we're talking about. And so I can see, for example, that I've got a virtual machine that is having some issues here, and it's impacting the database tier, okay? So I want to drill into this because maybe I've gotten a call from the app owner, or maybe I'm just hopefully being proactive here by monitoring this. And I see that I've got high CPU demand on that VM that's running the database. And what we mean by demand, just as a refresher, if you're not familiar, is demand is the amount of resources of a particular resource, in this case CPU, that a virtual machine would like to use or needs to use in order to service the application that's running on the VM. So we can see, CPU demand being 116 some odd percent means that we need about 15 to 20% more CPU resources to fully service this application or this database that supports the application. So what we don't know is why CPU demand is so high, and there could be several reasons for this. It could be a problem with the infrastructure. It could be a problem with the application. It could be that it just needs more CPU. Rather than adding more CPU to a virtual machine, it's important to understand why you're adding it and if that's the right thing to do. So that's what we'll investigate in this scenario. So let's start with the virtual machine because that's our domain as a virtual administrator. And I go in and I see that I have an alert here. Maybe this is the alert that caught my attention and says the CPU usage is at 100% for an extended period of time. So it's pinned at 100%. It's using all the CPU that's allocated to it. And I have a suggestion here. All of our alerts, out of the box alerts, have recommendations, one or more recommendations. And some of them are actionable. Some of them will say, click here to do this. In this case, it says, check processes running on the virtual machine to see if any are hung and need to be restarted. Okay, well, typically I'd have to contact the owner, see if they can give me a login or if they can run top on the VM and give me the output of the top command or something like that. It could take a lot of time to do that if I wanted to follow this recommendation. But now in vRealize Operations 8.0, I can actually go to the action menu for that VM and run get top in processes. And this will just go out, run that command on the virtual machine guest OS, and then return the result to me. Okay, so I didn't have to log in. I didn't have to get SSH. In a lot of environments, SSH isn't even an option or something you don't want to give out carte blanche, or even give access to IT operations to the OS. The OS is managed by a different team, maybe, for example. So very quickly, I get a result back that helps me as the VI admin understand what this virtual machine is doing. I can see that the MySQL process is using all the CPU. There are actually 4 CPUs allocated to this virtual machine. That's why I'm getting 400%. But that very quickly indicates to me that I don't have a rogue process. I don't have something else running, like maybe Apache running on here, or maybe there's Python running that's using a lot of the CPU. It's MySQL, which is good in a way because I've further narrowed the problem to the particular application that's running on this VM and how I might solve that issue. So armed with that information, I can dig a little bit deeper into what's going on the VM and ask vRealize operations to apply its machine learning algorithms to get me more evidence. Tell me more about what's going on this virtual machine. And you can see here on this new tab that we've added in 8.0, we start to give you information that correlates with this virtual machine, the related objects within the scope of that virtual machine, and the related time frame to the alert. So, you know, around the alert, when the alert started, you know, maybe going back a couple of hours and to the present time. And just pulling in all the events, property changes, and metric anomalies that, excuse me, may be interesting and help us in our troubleshooting. Now, this is just a snippet of something that's called the Troubleshooting Workbench. Let's actually launch into the full workbench where you have full control. Excuse me. Need to take a sip of water. And in the Troubleshooting Workbench, you can see that, you know, it's collected the events, property changes, and metrics, excuse me, for me that will be of interest. Just one second. Okay, I think I got that out of my system. Apologize for that. What I have two controls here, two variables that I can consider. I still have, you know, this you know, range of the related objects, and I have a time frame, and that time frame is set based on the alert scope. But the first thing I'm going to do is change that time frame and go back for the past 6 hours. I want to extend that out and get a little more analysis on what may have led up to this particular problem. The other thing that I want to do is increase the scope. So I'm looking at the OS here, and I see that there's a SQL service. It also happens that I'm monitoring that SQL service. This just indicates that a SQL service was discovered and there are dependencies on that service. But I'm also monitoring that service, so I want to bring that in as well. So I'm bringing in the MySQL statistics into this picture, and all that's being pulled in. So very quickly, vRealize operations goes out, uses those machine learning algorithms and says what events, property changes, and anomalous metrics might be interesting to you. And I can review these and I can decide whether or not they're helpful to me in troubleshooting. I can dismiss them if they're not. I can pin them if they are and do a little more research on those. So you see things, for example, as I scroll down here, that I have shopping cart database connection count, you know, as one of those metrics. And what's interesting here is that we see that prior to that alert trigger at around 9 a.m., things were, you know, hovering along around, you know, between, looks like maybe 30, 40 connections on average. And then all of a sudden it shot up to more than double that. We're at, you know, we're averaging about 100 connections now. Now that's interesting. That kind of correlates with what I saw earlier with the SQL service when we ran that top in. So this may be the reason that I'm pinning my SQL CPU, the MySQL service is pinning CPUs because we have a lot more connections. But let's drill down into that a little bit more. So I pinned that to the metric tab, and in the metric tab, when I investigate this, I have, of course, the shopping cart database metric for connection count here, but it's showing me all the focus right now is on the virtual machine metrics. And vRealize operations will actually highlight, again, this is an aspect of the machine learning capability in vRealize operations, or the AI capability in vRealize operations, to say, hey, these two metrics, the CPU usage and the CPU demand, you may want to look at those because they are behaving abnormally. And so I'll do that. You know, this is, instead of me trying to figure out which of these metrics I should be looking at, I'll just select these two. And sure enough, when I look at the CPU usage, now remember I talked about what demand meant. Demand is how much of the resource do I need to meet the demand of the application. When you talk about the CPU usage here, we were fine. We were just under 100%, you know, 98%, running very efficiently, right, at that for the number of connections that we had. But when that connection count increased, that's when I pinned at 100%, and that's when vRealize operations figured out, well, you're pinned at 100%, but this thing really wants to run at about 116, 120%. So if you want to meet that demand, you need to add more CPU, okay? So this is great information, and I can use this to create, I can actually click on this button here. I won't do it right now, but click on this button here, and it would create a dashboard, an ad hoc dashboard that I could then share with the DBA. I could share it with the account, with the application team, and say, hey, what's going on here? I see that your usage ticked up, and we're pinned on CPU. We're not sized to handle this number of connections, okay? So as a virtual administrator, this is a great way. I love this because, you know, usually the finger is pointed at, hey, these VMs are slow. You know, I'm on the wrong host or something like that. That's what's causing my problem. And the problem is actually that we've added more connections than we architected the system for. And so they go, yeah, actually, we started a marketing campaign this morning, and that marketing campaign is going to run for the next month, and we expect this usage level to continue. So we go ahead and we get an emergency change to add additional CPU to this VM. And I can do that right from vRealize operations, of course, by going to the virtual machine and to the action menu and setting the CPU count. Again, vRealize operations understands what the demand is. I can't add 20% more CPU. I'd have to add another CPU to meet that. I'm still in full control, like I talked about earlier in the discussion. So I'll just round that up to 6 CPUs, just to give me a little overhead, and also because I don't like odd numbered CPUs on VMs. It just drives me crazy. And then I can also say, yeah, you'll need to do a safe shutdown of this VM, add the CPU, and then bring it back up. I could take a snapshot also if I wanted to make sure I had a nice backup before I did that, or a back out plan, I should say, not a backup. And then begin the action. Now, normally, what I would do at this point is I would go to the alert in vRealize operations, and I would just update this and wait for the alert to clear, because it'll self-clear once the CPU usage drops below 100%. That's okay, but why don't I return to the Troubleshooting Workbench and use that to verify that what I did was the right thing to do and that it actually had the desired impact. Again, we can throw CPU, we can throw memory, we can throw storage at a problem, but how do we know that it was the right thing to do? And that's the question we're going to answer next. So I'm going to reduce my scope now because I made the change on the virtual machine. It's going to reduce the scope of the objects down to the virtual machine. I'm going to interrogate the metrics to see if there were any significant changes before and after I added the additional CPU. And you can see here, for example, my guest CPU queue, which had shot up appreciably when that incident started around 9 a.m. And then right when I added the additional CPU, brought it back online, it dropped. That's good. That's kind of what we expected. So let's use this as our basis for doing some more interrogation of the virtual machine and its behavior and performance. Now, this time, instead of looking at, kind of combing through these metrics, I'm going to use another capability in vRealize operations that uses that AI engine. I'm going to do this metric correlation. And what I'm telling vRealize operations to do is look at all the other metrics on this virtual machine and compare them to this guest CPU queue and find me ones that have a similar pattern of behavior within the same time period. So I can see, for example, my CPU demand has a similar pattern. It dropped, right after I added CPU. That doesn't really surprise me, but I want to pin that to the metric chart just so I can look at it and compare it later. Now, this is really interesting. This is kind of an unforeseen outcome, but it's a positive outcome. And what I mean by that is when you look at the write IOPS on that database server, we were humming along just fine at that connection rate that was previously normal before the marketing campaign started. And then when we started pinning our CPU and our guest CPU queue shot up, well, an effect of that is we're not able to service write IOPS. Okay. Now, if we had looked at this alone, if we looked at data store write IOPS without any kind of metric correlation, we may have gone down the wrong path and started troubleshooting a storage issue, when indeed it's not a storage issue. It was bottlenecking at the CPU, and it impacted storage because we weren't able to write out to the database fast enough. Okay, so I have an inverse correlation here, and now that we added CPU and we got rid of that queuing issue on the CPU, we're back up to our previous level in this 250, 260 range. That could be our SLA for this application, for example. That may be. So I'll pin that. I'll close this, and now what I have is another dashboard, a chart that I can share with the application owner to say, hey, we added the CPU, but just to let you know, not only did it, not only did it drop the CPU demand, we're not pinning at 100% CPU utilization anymore, but look at this. Your write IOPS are back to where they were before, so your database performance based on resource usage, things that we control in the virtual world is back to where it should be. And we'll continue to monitor this, on an ongoing basis, maybe add it to a dashboard or set an alert or something based on this particular metric. So that's kind of the troubleshooting workbench combined with app-aware operations in one. Hopefully gives you a good idea of all the capability that we are bringing to bear in this release. So I see there's a lot of Q&A piled up here. So Chris, you want to highlight any particular ones?
Yep, sure. So there are several in here that are kind of asking the same thing. So I'm going to try to roll this up into one. So
okay, awesome.
There was someone asking as you were going through this, are you using Telegraph? Does process visibility require tools, or to use the top processes, do we need some sort of agent, and how's it being executed? So I think taking kind of a step back here, when you're looking at this, especially in the troubleshooting workbench or the top in, what is required there for our customers to achieve that?
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. So there's a couple of things at play. There are two features. One of those is application monitoring, and the other is service discovery. Okay, so let's start with the service discovery piece, and let me flip to the slide for that actually. So service discovery is something you can enable and turn on. It does require VM tools to be running on the virtual machines, and there are actually specific versions that are required. When you go to enable this in product, it will actually show you like a link to a KB that lists the tools versions, but it's basically 10.0 for Linux and 11. Oh gosh, it's 11.01 or 11.1, I forget, for the Windows side, as well as OpenVM tools. OpenVM tools and Windows are on the same numbering scheme now, from what I understand. But anyway, there's a KB that's linked in product, and I can show that if anybody wants to see where that is. But what it does, once you turn it on, one of the things you have to provide are credentials to the OS. And the requirements are documented for what those credentials are. But it's essentially running scripts in the OS through VM tools to basically do inspection and find out what services are running and what ports they're running on, and if there are any incoming connections, okay? And it has patterns for 41 services, but you can also add your own services. As long as you know the port number and the service name, then you can add that to the list as well, so you can actually whitelist applications. And then, as I mentioned, what it does is it understands there are incoming connections from other VMs, and it'll actually build application relationships based on two VMs. For example, my web server may be making backend calls to a database server, and it'll see that and say, oh, this is a two-tier application. It can actually build that application object for you with those services in it. And then if you want to, you can take the next step, which is to install Telegraph to do the application monitoring. So that's step two. But the other thing that it enables is, since we have the credentials that we need to run those scripts, why not allow you to do things like run a top-in process right there from the UI, just as we saw in the demo? Or why not run a script, from the console instead of logging in? The nice thing I like about that is that allows you to, if you wanted to run a script, say to interrogate the file system, DFH, find out how much room is left on the various amounts on the file system or volumes on the file system, for example. Instead of, again, logging into the OS to do that, you can just do that directly from vRealize operations, get the result back, and see that. So the application monitoring piece, and I don't know if I have a slide on that, so let me actually switch into the demo environment. The application monitoring piece that I show in here, where we're getting the MySQL metrics from our VM, that requires the Telegraph agent. So it's a different feature, okay? So we talked about service discovery as one feature and what it allowed. Application monitoring will monitor 20 packaged applications and will allow you to get metrics about those applications. And you can decide whether or not you want to deploy agents right from the console. And actually, might be good to just go into a demo environment and show you, instead of, I'm doing a lot of hand waving on my end, and I realize nobody can see my hands. So let's go in here and actually look at live product. Okay, so the way this works is you go to the administration tab, you go to inventory, and then you go to manage agents. Okay, so manage agents, and you say, oh, okay, I know that I'm running Tomcat on this particular VM, and so I've installed the agent by clicking on this install button. I provide the credentials that I need to access and run that install. It's only used for the install. The only other time you need credentials to do anything with the Telegraph agent for application monitoring is if you want to uninstall it. But other than that, it's actually securely managed through something called the application remote collector. And then since I already have it installed, I'm going to cancel that install. Once it's installed, it'll interrogate and find out, yep, you do indeed have Tomcat running on here. And I want to configure that for monitoring. I would fill out some information here. You can see some information is required, some is optional, but I, at a minimum, fill out the required information, save it, close it, and it'll begin monitoring. So let me show you some that are actually monitoring in my environment. Okay, so here I've got MySQL, I've got Apache, etc. So if we look at this virtual machine, for example, you can see that it's got Apache and MySQL running on it. And so I'm getting all kind of nice metrics from that Apache server. So you can see there's a relationship that's automatically created. It knows it's running Linux OS. It knows it's running Apache on this virtual machine. And when I come in here and I look at my all metrics screen, I can actually see the relationship end to end from, my production application through the OS to the the VM that's running the guest OS. I can even see that this is a VRA deployment, what project it is, what blueprint was used, et cetera, to do that. So anything that, I would need to see in terms of where this application came from, who owns it, where it got deployed, et cetera, are here. And then I can pull up metrics for that application, for example, look at the busy workers. And then I can compare that with metrics, for example, for utilization, and look at maybe CPU usage. And I can start to do some comparisons here between the two. I can zoom these charts in and so forth, do some troubleshooting or analysis here, or I can go to the troubleshooting workbench as I showed in the demo. So that's the application monitoring piece. And then of course the service discovery, you'll see that, it's on its own. It's like, yeah, you got two services basically running on this. And just to show you what this looks like, for example, when I look at the Apache service, one of the metrics that you'll see is, so actually property, you'll see the ports, you'll see, yeah, here we go, the connection count, like if how many connections are coming in, incoming, outgoing connections, okay? And then it'll say, it'll also say, is this a member of an application? Yeah, it's discovered it and it's part of an application. And what we mean by that is if we go to environment and look at applications, it's actually discovered and created a new application group based on the services that it discovered. I actually clicked the wrong one here. Let me go back. Applications. Initially it'll give it that kind of long GUID, but you can rename it to something meaningful, which is what I did here. But this was automatically discovered. It's like, oh, this web server is talking to this database server. So that looks like a two-tier application. I didn't create this. This was all automatically created for me on the fly by the service discovery piece. So hopefully that answers all the questions related to that. But yeah, for this functionality, VM tools is required for both the service discovery and Telegraph to initially lay down the agents do the lifecycle management that I showed a few minutes ago.
Yeah, that's great, and thanks for bringing that up on the fly there. That was actually really interesting. So, so thank you. Speaking of the Telegraph agent, we have a few questions about that, and then some troubleshooting workbench specific questions. But I want to see if you kind of need to move on with the remaining content, and we go back.
No, yeah, let's. I love questions, so I'd
okay.
rather all the fine folks tell me what they want to hear about than anything. So
Yep, gotcha. So, with the Telegraph agent being kind of, we've made it easy as an automated process. I'm kind of probably looking into this question too much,
Mm.
but I'm sure there are architectural decisions that are made that are preventing like the automatic kind of telegraph, or I should say the automated Telegraph agent installation. Is there a way to do that manually, or do we support a way? Do we expose any documentation about what we're doing when we install that?
Yeah, I actually have a slide on that. Let me see if I can pull that up. But yeah, the agent install itself is the way that it's done is through the UI today. So you actually have to. Sorry, I'm trying to do two things at once here. You actually have to go in and click on the icons that I showed you to deploy the agents. We are going to, on the roadmap is to have APIs to do that, and then also what we want to do is make that automatic. If you're doing it from vRealize operations, vRealize automation, just click a button and say, yeah, when you deploy this, I also want to install Telegraph and start monitoring the services that I'm deploying with this as well. I'm trying to pull up the architecture slide that I have for that. So if you'll just give me a moment. Is that kind of what you're asking, or?
I think that they're trying, the question is around, an out of band way to install the Telegraph agent, maybe, in case
yeah, the out of band is coming. So we're looking at initially what you'll see are APIs. In fact, I got a preview of those APIs. Here we go. I got a preview of those APIs. So those will be coming really soon, so that you can do this out of band. The other thing that we're looking at doing is there's a separate component, as people, the customers on this call that have looked into this may be aware, called the Application Remote Collector, or ARC.
Yep.
ARC. And we're looking at ways to onboard that to vRealize operations, so you don't have yet another component to deploy. So we want to simplify that process as well. So yeah, we've gotten a lot of feedback on, hey, this is great, lifecycle management is great, but if I can't do it out of band, it's kind of doesn't scale, terribly much. Nobody likes going into UI and doing a lot of clicky.
Yep.
This is the architecture. Yeah, so this is the architecture, and the reason I wanted to bring this up is because it kind of explains the situation. The situation is predicated on providing lifecycle management. So in previous version, endpoint operations, we didn't provide lifecycle management of the agent. It was up to the customer to figure out how to deploy agents. And that was one problem we wanted to solve, when we switched to Telegraph. And the way that we did this is, you'll see here, there's a salt stack. There's a salt master, and then on the VM, there's a salt minion. And that's really the basis of it. So for example, when you, what's known by engineering as bootstrapping the VM or installing the agent for the first time, when you install the agent, that's why we need the credentials initially, is because through the, there's a feature in vCenter and VM tools called guest user mapping. And guest user mapping allows vRealize, or vCenter to perform actions, or to run, execute code or whatever on the guest OS with a set of credentials that is cached by vCenter. Actually, I think it's cached on the host. I have a blog article about it that I've written up but haven't published yet. It goes into a lot of detail on that, but suffice it to say, it's a feature of vCenter, and we use that to initially push the salt stack down. So when you say install, there's several things that are happening. We're actually installing salt, a minion on the VM, and then at that point, we don't use VM tools anymore. We're using the salt stack to push the agent, do the service, in this case, the discovery of services by the process to see what Telegraph can monitor. It's not the service discovery piece. And then manage the various plugins for Telegraph as well. So everything in this light blue box is really, it's a container. And actually, if you look at, if you were to look at this on your VMs, these are actually containers that are running. So we're using containers to run this salt stack, this salt minion, and the Telegraph agent, and that's where all the control plane is done through that salt stack on the application remote collector, which is this box down here. So as you can imagine, the question I get a lot is, well, can I just install Telegraph on the VM and then you discover it? And so as you can imagine, that's problematic because since we're using salt stack, we don't have a way to inject that pre-installed Telegraph agent into a container and bootstrap it and bring it into our inventory and things like that. So the way to do it would be through APIs. And you can also see where if you wanted to install this agent on physical hardware, not a VM, but an OS running on physical hardware, we're actually working on a way to do that, to push that agent, this entire stack out to the physical systems as well. But this is essentially showing you the control. I know this is a really busy diagram, but the reason I want to show you is because there's a lot of stuff that we're doing behind the scenes as part of that process, and it may help people understand, why there are things they can and can't do today with that. But we're working on solving those problems. The idea, though, is that we're taking away a lot of the pain that you would have of deploying at scale, by managing these agents, upgrading the agents, and so forth for you. So does that help? Good stuff.
Yeah.
Does everybody want that slide?
Yeah. Yes, please. No. It was. I think so. But I've got one more. If you want one, it's around reporting, or do you want to move on? What would you like to do?
No. Yeah, that's fine. Reporting.
Okay. So this is mostly around the metric charts and reporting on them, and instead of doing them one at a time, getting them all together. And I've actually even seen this with some of the this question asked in the same way with the what if analysis, and at the end having a report instead of accessing vRealize operations. Just in case we're not missing something, is there a reporting mechanism to get all of those metrics in those metric charts for people that don't need access to vRealize operations?
Yeah, so there's, you can obviously run reports, but one of the things you can do with dashboards is, let's say I've created this dashboard for this application here. Okay, this is just a two-tier application. And I may have created this, for my own use, but I want to share it with the application owner, or I want to share it with the network admin or somebody who doesn't have access to vRealize operations. And you'll notice too, when I select different objects, it should come up and show me, I've got something broken on this dashboard. But you can see it's interactive, right? So things are updating here, and as I select different objects, this information is changing, okay? What I also have is the ability to, potentially select items and perform actions and things like that. So just keep that in the back of your mind. What I can do here, though, is I can click on this icon and I can share this dashboard. I have 5 options, but the most interesting, I think, and directly relevant to your question is I can share this dashboard as a URL with someone who has no login credentials. So I can set it to never expire. I can copy the link. I can then see that, that existing link is shared. I can update that. or delete the link, change the time frame, etc. But if I go to incognito mode here, so I'm not actually logged into VROps, and I use that link, then it will come up and show me just that dashboard. And one of the things that you'll notice is, or well, really not on this dashboard, but one of the things I would call out is they still have the full capability to navigate the dashboard, click on things, use the interactions. But any actions that they may have, like for example, if they wanted to try to go to the details of this VM, for example, they can't. Okay, so they can't escape the confines of this dashboard. They can't poke around at things or take, add their own CPU, like we showed from the action menu. So it's a read-only version of the dashboard. So they can see this alert summary, and that's about it. They can't navigate to the alert, that type of thing, and inspect the alert details, things like that. But anything you create in the dashboard can be shared with them. And then there are other, options that you can do here for sharing as well. But I think relative to your particular question, it was phrased as reporting, but this is one way to share that metric information. So these, it could be metric charts. This is a kind of a scoreboard chart here, but these could be metric charts like I had with the dashboard that we did in that demonstration. Could be anything really. As far as reporting is concerned, when I look at reports, I can set up reports. So here's a capacity report, for example. I can actually schedule this report to run, and I'll just say, what was it, data center. We'll do custom data centers, all clusters. Okay. Oh, it's because it's a distributed switch. Let me do this. Okay. So if I schedule and do custom data centers, all clusters, then I can schedule the report to run. And then I don't have SMTP configured here, but you can see that if I did, I could email the report to some group or multiple groups or multiple email addresses, or I can have it sent to a file share location as well. So yep. That would be another way to share that information with someone who doesn't have login, or you don't want to have login credentials for vRealize operations.
Yeah, that's awesome. Is there a way to tie that in with the troubleshooting workbench? So when you were running the workbench, there were some metrics that were there. Is there a way to export all of those?
Yeah, no, that's a great, yeah. So I kind of alluded to that. I didn't really show it. So let me go in here and let's pull up a workbench. Okay, I'm just ripping here, so nothing. Back this out a little bit. And so let's say, for example, it's like, oh, look at, here's memory usage. And I pin that, and I'm just going through my troubleshooting, and I'm doing some of that correlation that I was doing. And I do self metrics, and I go, oh, this is cool. I mean, look at this. Oh, that's interesting. And so I have, like, oh, these are cool metrics. If I click on this, I can generate a dashboard on the fly. And once I have that dashboard created, I can then go and share that dashboard. I'll show you just what it looks like. If I go to all dashboards, cool metrics to see, there's my metric chart. I can enhance this dashboard, add more content to it, or I can just share it as is. Same process.
And then, gotcha. Yeah, so that was from the Troubleshooting Workbench. I'm sorry, would you go back to what you clicked to get to the dashboard on the fly? That was actually kind of pretty neat.
Oh yeah, and you can do that from, so that was from the Troubleshooting Workbench. So when I pin a metric, you'll see that this metrics tab kind of there's an indicator here that's like, oh, you pin metrics. You go in and look, and this brings you to the metrics view. This is just like if you're in the metric view for a particular object, right? You know, no different. And you will always have this generate dashboard button.
Yep, gotcha.
Here.
Okay, just
Yeah,
making
and
sure.
it'll generate a dynamic dashboard based on whatever metric charts that you have here. So,
And then instead of sending a link from a dashboard, you can actually export that. Is that right?
if you wanted to, yeah, you could export. If you didn't want to do that, you could say save a snapshot, full screen snapshot. You could also, if they like, give me something I can bring into Excel. Okay, there you go. Here's a CSV. You can do that as well. So you have multiple options to share it directly from here. There's a lot of power. I could probably almost do an entire session just on the
Right.
metric view.
Yeah, sorry to take you off track
No,
here. I
no,
thought it was a pretty
this is
good
good.
question. Yeah.
No, I think it's a great question. There are multiple ways to share information. It just really depends on where you are in the product and what information you're trying to share. But yeah, in terms of like the troubleshooting flow, where I said, oh, I want to share this information with the DBA because it looks interesting, and I want to verify something, and I want us both to be looking at the same thing. I'd use this to generate a dashboard to do that. And in that way, the reason I would do that versus doing a snapshot of it, which is just a screen cap, you could do the same thing, right? Screen cap it, is if I share the dashboard with him or her, they have the ability to, do this kind of thing, to use these tools on the dashboard menu to zoom in, zoom out, change the time frame. So it gives them the ability to interact with the data instead of just giving them static data. So that's why I recommend going that approach.
Got it. Thanks for going over all that.
Yeah, no worries.
We've got a question about SAP HANA and the Troubleshooting Workbench, but again, I want to check to see if you have some other things that you wanted to cover.
The only other thing I was going to talk about was compliance, and let me just address that real quick, and then we can spend the rest of the time answering questions. So the compliance has changed. We did kind of change the workflow for compliance, and we also added visibility into the VMware Cloud on AWS, which from a compliance standpoint is a bit different, since you're paying VMware to manage the virtual infrastructure. The only compliance concerns that you would have then is, your responsibility would be for the VMs themselves. Are the VMs compliant? So we've crafted a special tab in product to show kind of the difference. Let me show you what that looks like. You can see, for example, we have your SDDC, which is your traditional private, vCenters running in your four walls. And then you have a tab for the VMC SDDC. Since the security profiles are different, the checks that we do are different for each of those. The VMC is actually a subset of the SDDC. Then that's why we have the two tabs. But we also added new benchmarks for vSAN and for NSXT. So you'll see those cards as well. So the security configuration guide for NSXT and vSAN also are available in 8.0, as well as the ability to import and export any custom compliance templates that you create. And just the whole look and feel of this page is updated. I think a lot easier to use. And if you didn't know, we do have integration with the compliance, if you install the VRO management pack, if you're using vRealize Orchestrator management pack, it will actually remediate, or you can use it to auto remediate some of the compliance issues that you may find on ESXi hosts, for example. So just something to be aware of there. The other big thing, just real quick, continuous availability is a new capability we added to the platform. So before we had, for your vRealize operations clusters, you had something called HA, okay, which was very helpful, right? But still exposed you to risks of problems in, in the data center. If the data center went kaplooey, then you'd lose your vRealize operations visibility. Now with continuous availability, you can stretch the vRealize operations between 2 fault domains, and those could be 2 geographically different sites. And it'll actually replicate the entire cluster between the 2 sites. What's nice about this is you can take one of these sites offline if you're doing DR testing or business continuity testing, or even for upgrades and maintenance. You want to take one offline, back it up, bring it back online, take the other one offline, back it up, or same thing for like an upgrade scenario as well. Let me see if there's any more. We talked about the SaaS offering, so I'm not going to drill into that. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it. So yeah, let's wrap up with any additional questions that we have in the time remaining.
Yeah, this is really good stuff. You can tell that the wheels are turning on all the things that you touched on. So
Cool.
This is really good. So one question that was, that was out here, and I think I saw a few others mention it maybe, but does the Troubleshooting Workbench have tools that can measure SAP HANA metrics in the same way that you drilled down into the SQL DB?
I got you. Yeah. So the Troubleshooting Workbench will, this scope will extend to anything that you're monitoring in vRealize operations. Okay. So it will, if you have Blue Medora management packs, if you have, management packs from Dell, Cisco, HP, NetApp, et cetera, any hardware, infrastructure management packs, the Troubleshooting Workbench will work with any of those and will pull in relevant evidence from that entire stack. So yeah, if there's a management pack you have installed for SAP HANA, and I'm pretty sure we have one, or Blue Medora has one, then yeah, that will work with the Troubleshooting Workbench.
Awesome. So I figured I would kind of shift over into one of your last slides just so you could talk about that a little bit more about compliance. There's a question here that says, can you define your own compliance?
You absolutely can. And let me show you how easy it is to do that. So the compliance actually works off of alerts. And just to show you what I mean by that, I'll go to the compliance tab here, and I can see that, I've got 914, non-compliant objects in my environment. Basically what this means is if I drill in on the virtual machine, or actually let me do a host system, because I honestly, I think, and the folks on the phone here can or the folks watching can comment whether or not they agree with this. But I think the host compliance is probably the biggest use case for any of this. I don't know that a lot of people worry about virtual machine compliance as much. But if we look at, like, this host is violating the, let me pick one, that different one. But this host is violating the vSphere security configuration guide. Now, what that really means is there's an alert set up that has multiple symptoms, and these symptoms, okay, are representative of the different control items in this case, VMware security configuration guide. But this alert itself is a compliance alert. You'll see this little tag up here. Because you can create alerts and you can create compliance alerts, you can create your own compliance alerts, okay? So we provide a lot of them out of the box. Now, the second point to this is that once I have compliance alerts, either ones that I've created or ones that come as part of one of these benchmarks that we provide, I can come in and create a new custom benchmark, my compliance, and then I can select any of the compliance alerts that have been added by the benchmarks that we provide, or any compliance alerts that you create. So this is definitely customizable. For example, if I only wanted ESXi compliance alerts or related alerts in my custom benchmark, then I would just select those specific alerts, click next, select a policy to apply it to, click finish, and then that would immediately take effect, and within a few minutes you'd have the result of your custom compliance templates. You know, so you could do a combination of out-of-the-box compliance alerts, including your own. And so you can see here it's running the initial assessment. It'll come back in a few minutes and give you a score related to that assessment. Okay. I think that answers the question, but if not, happy to take a follow-up.
Yep, for sure. So another one on here, you touched on, I believe it was availability in your slide. And there was a question on here, if I can find it, sorry, we've got a lot in here, about backups. So is there a solution for actual backup configurations, not just availability when it comes to VROps? I think that's the question.
Yeah, we do have in the, we do have a section in the documentation that deals with backups. I think it may actually be a separate doc. Let's see if I can find that real quick. But we give general guidance on backing up. So we don't say like, go use this or you must use this solution. There are some requirements. I'm looking, related resources. Might be under the best practices guide, but there are some requirements for that. Yeah, backup and restore. So in this best practices guide, so you can find that, it talks about what you would need to do to back that up. So we don't talk about like a specific solution, but we just tell you, what is required to back up the cluster and how you would back the cluster up. Okay. For example, take the cluster offline, and this can actually be done through APIs. You don't have to do it manually. There are APIs to do that. They're called CASA APIs. Let me see if I can find, because there's documentation on the appliance, but unless you know exactly where it is, and I'm gonna give you guys the keys to that kingdom. It's not like we try to hide it. It's just I don't know that it's documented in our public documentation, which I need to file a bug for that. Yeah, if you go to this address, if you want to take a screenshot of this, that's fine. If you go to that address on one of your cluster nodes, you'll go to the CASA API guide, and that's where you can do cluster management. So all these commands to like, you can create a cluster like vRealize Lifecycle Manager actually uses these to create clusters and manage and update and stuff like that. So there are APIs to take the cluster offline, is my point, as part of your backup. So you could automate the entire process from beginning to end. So.
Nice. That's great. Thanks for sharing that, John. We're right at 11:30, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time on this call. So this was really, really great content. Of the remaining questions that are in the Q&A, like I said earlier, this is really getting the wheels turning. So I think this was really, really useful content. Please be sure to follow up with your TAM on any questions that you didn't get answered, and we'll try to facilitate that back into VMware for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Yep. Any closing thoughts, John, before I wrap up?
No, I would just, again, just kind of toot our own horn here. Go to vRealize.vmware.com. That's our microsite. A lot of good information here, walkthrough demos, etc., videos, as well as the sample exchange where you can find sample dashboards, supermetrics, and orchestrator workflows related to vRealize operations. So be sure to check that out as well.
Yep, thanks, John. And another plug here, something that I regularly do. You could search for John's name on blogs.vmware.com, and you'll find a lot of useful content there as well.
Absolutely.
Thanks again, John. As we mentioned at the beginning, this presentation was recorded, and your TAM can make that available to you. Be sure to join us next month when we'll be looking at VMware Hyperconverged infrastructure solutions with Paul McSherry. Paul has a ton of experience in this area and does a great job of presenting content in an easy to understand manner. So should be a great session, and you won't want to miss it. So with that, we'll close out. Thanks so much for joining us today.